When assembling the landing gear, the first thing you want to do is lay out all the contents of the kit. So the two wheel pants, the two wheels, the wheel cuffs, and all the hardware that is labeled in the hardware bag for landing gear. And as you can see here, I have all the hardware laid out: the axles, the wheel collars, the wheel cuff bolts, the screws for the wheel pants, and the screws, lock washers, and lock nuts to actually put the landing gear onto the fuselage. So here you see the contents of the pack. Just make sure you get that all laid out when starting to do the landing gear assembly. And then next, what you want to do is you want to first identify the landing gear is actually an airfoil, and you want to make sure you identify that the big side of the airfoil and then the thin side of the airfoil goes towards the rear of the plane, and the big part of the landing gear goes towards the front of the airframe. First thing you want to do is all these wheel cuffs are pre-drilled, and they have a nice wood block on the back of them. I like to just take a little bit of thin CA and just drip a little bit of thin CA on the back of those to make sure that those are nice and tight and glued down well so they don't come loose at all. Maybe hit it with a little accelerator to speed that up a little bit. But then once you have those ready to go on, it's just simple from there to make sure that you get these on the right side. I like to put the wheel cuffs on both sides and line up the holes in the landing gear. Now keep in mind that the landing gear, the screws for that cuff are these screws here that you'll see they have a small little washer on them. I've already taken the time to screw these into these holes and make sure that these holes are like sort of pre-tapped to get ready for that installation. So once I put these on, once I slide them both onto the landing gear, I like to just put a little piece of tape on the front side of this airfoil to remind me which is the front side goes on the plane, which side it goes on. So when I'm fitting the wheel pants, I have that right. So we'll go ahead and bolt these on with the hardware provided, and then we'll move to the axles. All right, we got those screwed on, and you can leave them loose. It's your choice. You can put them on after the landing gear is on the airframe, or you can do it before. I like to do it before. It's a little bit easier than tipping the plane over and trying to get them on there. So put that on there. The next thing you want to do is install the axles. Just go ahead and sort of just set my set screw on here. Set my set screw on here, sorry, to make sure we get the wheel pants lined up right. Now what I like to do is I like to take and hold the, sort of hard to do for you on camera here, hold the wheel pan on and then set the wheel actually on the wheel collar, and then just line that up as if it was at the end, and this will help you get your wheel centered in the wheel pan, and you'll be able to set that inside collar. You'll be able to set this inside collar. Then once you have this inside collar set with the wheel centered in the wheel pan, go ahead and put yourself a flat spot in it using a Dremel tool. I've already done that. I've put a little flat spot on there. Use some blue Loctite to lock that in place. Little blue Loctite. You don't want any of these landing gear parts vibrating loose or coming loose in flight. That could be make for a tricky landing. So make sure you get that locked down nice and tight on your flat spot. Then you're ready to bolt the assembly into the wheels. These are all nicely pre-drilled. The landing gear is pre-drilled so it fits well. Even though this is a nylock nut, I still like to use blue Loctite, just again to keep anything from rattling loose there during flight. So both of these, the front side and the back side, are 1/2" nuts. So if you just get yourself a little ratcheting wrench, or do it with just 2 1/2" wrenches, you can get this locked down nice and tight. Then you're ready to, once you get those locked in, then you're ready to put the wheel on. Again, you want to make sure that you want to pre-fit that again. Just double check it. Make sure that the wheel pant is on and that it's actually centered in the wheel is centered in the wheel pant. That's going to be important. But the next step is to put the outside collar on. What I like to do before putting the outside collar on is to put a little bit of lube the axle with some lithium grease or Teflon lube. That way you get the wheel spinning nice, no squeaks. Again, you come over here, again, blue Loctite. On your set screw. Now it's important you'll see this in your kit. It's important to make sure you have a little flat spot on the end of that. You don't want these coming loose. You don't want your wheels coming loose. You get that on nice and tight and make sure it rolls good. Then your next step is your wheel pant. The nice thing about this kit is the wheel pants have pre-installed blind nuts ready for installation. So then you're going to use the order of installation for that is your Allen screw and washer. It's going to go here, and then this will install your wheel pant. And you want to use blue Loctite on those as well. Oops. So I'll just make sure you put your Loctite on there. Loctite again on the other one. And the nice thing about that is your wheel pants will be The angle of them will be preset because that's all pre-drilled and ready to go. Make sure that your wheels are on there nice. And you'll be ready set. Repeat that on the other side, and you'll be ready to install this on the fuselage. Prior to putting the landing gear on the plane, this is just raw wood. So what we're gonna do is just be very careful. I got some very watered down epoxy. I'm gonna just use an epoxy brush, and just gonna sort of paint this bare wood. Be careful not to drip any on the covering. I'm just going to paint this bare wood with the epoxy. That'll do a couple of things. Help strengthen that up a little bit, help strengthen these joints up, and it'll also fuel proof. It'll be good fuel proofing for this landing gear block prior to installing your landing gear. So again, you can use some blue tape to tape off around the covering there so you don't get anything on the covering. Or just be extremely careful there not to drip any on the covering. Get it nice covered with epoxy, and then we'll go ahead and let this set up prior to installing the landing gear on the plane. And that's what we'll do next. I like getting it, making sure that it seeps into those joints there in the corners. Gives it a little extra strength. This is good this is a good way to fuel proof any bare wood for that matter. Just real thin down epoxy, and you use just basic rubbing alcohol to do that with. You can see it's just thinned down to a water type consistency, and then give that time to set up, and then we'll go ahead and come back and install the landing gear. Now that the epoxy's done curing, we're going to go ahead and mount the landing gear. So again, pay close attention to the airfoil, my piece of blue tape there that I have on. I just want to make sure that that's facing forward on the plane. So I'm going to go ahead and just set this in place. And you're going to want to note the order of installation for the landing gear. So you're going to have a small lock washer that goes on there, and then a full-size washer that goes on each bolt. So just drop these through. You're going to want to again use, on the back side of this is a nylock nut, but I still like to use Loctite. So I'm going to go ahead, make sure all my bolts have Loctite on them. And then the same underneath inside where you put the nylock nut, you're going to use a flat washer and a lock washer as well. And then an 11/32 wrench for the bolt underneath. And I'll just put, and I'll get all these started. And again, I'm using a little bit of Loctite on them, even though you're using a nylock washer. You can't ever be too safe in my book. But again, the flat washer on the back side goes on first, and then the lock washer, and then the nut. Now, if you notice, I just loosened
I just loosened this cuff up a little bit and pulled it up. That'll make it easier to get your wood block in. That way you're not trying to force anything. So you're just going to get all 4 of these bolts on there. And then again, the inside, the nut's 11/32, so you can just get yourself a little wrench. Tighten down all 4 of these, then we'll come back and put the block in. So we got all 4 screws nice and tight. All the lock washers and regular washers in correct. Obviously you can see this block that covers the top of this. This is a tapered block, so it only goes in one way. So I just like to sneak that in under the wheel cuff there and set that in down tight. Then we'll pull this one on, tighten down this landing gear cuff, and then there's a couple different ways. Some people like to just use clear tape to tape this block down. I prefer to use the same color monocoat that's on here. I just cut a nice little strip there and monocoat that in. You can use clear tape, blendem tape. I've seen just about everything used, but it all works. But also these cuffs will do a really good job of holding this landing gear block in as well. So go ahead and tighten down this cuff here, and we will head to...
When installing the tail wheel, the first thing I like to do is completely disassemble the whole entire thing, and here you can see an exploded view of the order of assembly for the tail wheel. It's nice to take it all apart, make sure everything is properly Loctited and put together nice and tight. So you start with the carbon fiber holder, and then I just like to take, this is the bottom part of your again, blue Loctite. Put, even though it's a nylock nut, this part of your landing gear always loves to sort of come loose. So we put that there like that. Put that, get that down nice and tight. Again, it's a 10 millimeter wrench, so you just make sure that those are tight. Oops. And then the first thing I like to do is make sure that you find the right spot for your tiller to go on to the top of your where it steers your rudder from. So for instance, you want to make sure that this is down all the way, and that it's going to hit the flat spot. So when you're assembling this, you want to I took a little file, put a little flat spot on there, and just set that in there with your blue Loctite. Make sure that's lined up, and make sure that gets screwed down nice and tight. You don't want any of this stuff coming loose in flight. Now, same thing here when you're setting this. It's important to put this in first, because if you put this down on top of the shaft, that shaft will go up far enough to get in the way of your tiller arm there. So I like to just line that up, and there's a pre-installed flat spot on there for you. So again, just take that out. There's two set screws holding this particular piece on. So again, with the blue Loctite. And at this point, you want to make sure that you're lined up straight, and that's what that flat spot is for. That'll help you make sure that your steering is correct, straight in line with the so you're gonna go ahead and get that set, and just go back through your landing gear. You can take it all apart, make sure that everything's Loctited. You don't want any of this coming loose. They tend to, if you miss this step, they tend to come loose and come apart, and you're going back at the field and trying to tighten everything up. So now, if you look at that, since I found that flat spot in this shaft, you can see that that is aligned. Oops, I wasn't on camera there. You can see that that is aligned with the tail wheel 90 degrees. So then you want same thing down here. You want to take and make sure that this is Loctited. Now again, there's no flat spot down here, so I like to just take a little file and put a little flat spot on that for your set screw. That'll just help lock that set screw in and keep that from coming loose. It only takes a quick second. Again, some blue Loctite, and then line that up with your flat spot. And then you'll have that nice and tight. Then you're going to install your wheel. This comes with two wheel collars. Especially like to make sure that there's a flat spot on the outside one of the wheel collar. You got an 1.5 inch wheel with a bushing in it. I do. And once you get, what you want to do is center your wheel. So you just leave your wheel collars loose. Assemble this. Set your inside wheel collar. There's a little bushing on there. It's a little bit tricky to get on your tail wheel. Some people use, if you choose to use a bigger tail wheel or a different tail wheel, just got to make sure that that bushing's pushed into the wheel. So I like to just set this, get this set right in the center. Give yourself a little leeway there. Make a little mark. Set the inside wheel collar, and then I like to come back once you have that set. I like to come back. Oops. Clumsy today. I like to come back and flat spot this outside wheel collar to make sure that that just doesn't come off. And again, you can do that with just a quick file. Only takes a second. Come back. Make sure you don't forget to Loctite your collars. that flat spot will really allow you to some positive grip there. And then same thing on the inside wheel collar. I don't necessarily flat spot the inside wheel collar. I know some people like to do them both, but you definitely want to make sure that it's Loctited. It has some Loctite on it, and it's nice and tight. And that's it for the assembly of the landing gear. Obviously, these are your screws to screw it into the fuselage, and we'll go to that next, installing it on the fuselage. So there's your tail assembly. We already did your landing gear assembly, and then we'll install it on the fuselage next. Obviously, it doesn't need a lot of instructions on how to bolt the tail gear on, but obviously the order of assembly is the washer, the bolt, and the landing gear. So you're just going to make sure you slip that into the rudder. If your rudder's pre-installed, now this is a removable rudder, so if you're one of those people that have to remove the rudder on a regular basis, you'll just have to make sure that's lined up as you're doing that. But so just a little blue Loctite, and just install the bolts on your tail wheel, and you will be good to go. Make sure to get that blue lot on. There's already pre-installed lock nuts in there, so we're just going to go ahead and just get this screwed down. And that's it for your tail wheel. Okay, so the very first thing that I like to do when you start the fuselage, or start working on the fuselage, is obviously go around the whole entire fuselage and just tighten up all the covering, all the holes. Make sure everything is nice and tight, and you get the bottom tightened up, the sides tightened up, the turtle deck, everything as far as covering is all nice and secure and tight, and you spend some time making sure you get it down on the solid wood parts, you get it down nice. The other thing you're going to want to do first thing is you're going to want to remove some holes, all the holes. So a lot of people like to take, such as these cutouts, some of which I've already done here for you, but a lot of people like to take a soldering iron and use a soldering iron to just sort of take these holes out. I personally like to take a very sharp hobby knife and just sort of go around the hole. I like to just take that out and then just take my iron and make sure that that's down really good right where that's at. So there's a couple things that you're going to want to take out. Obviously you have your two wing bolts. So you can see here you have two wing bolts, and here you have two anti-rotation pins. So that goes for both sides. This is already pre-cut out. The wing tube opening is pre-cut out. You can just shave that up a little bit, make sure it's nice. The other thing that you're going to want to cut out is if you are doing a rear push-pull servo setup, you'll want to cut out the servo openings in the rear, but take time to investigate which side. There's obviously servo cutouts on both sides. Take time to investigate which side you want to put that on. That's also part of gluing your rudder control horn on. At that time you want to sort of identify those things. The other thing that you'll cut out on the bottom of the airframe, as you can see, is you'll have cutouts for your exhaust. And you can see here I've already sort of pre-installed that plate. And this plate came with the kit. It goes right here in the front, so you have to remove the covering out of the holes, and then use 4 screws to bolt this plate on. Now,
real quick, there's a couple things I want to talk about as you prepare to seal down all the covering and really get the fuselage covering nice and tight, which is going to be really important. But there's a couple things I want to talk about just briefly prior to talking about it during the motor install. So obviously there's 1, 2, 3, 4 openings in the bottom of the airplane. There's an opening in the front of the airplane which takes this cutout right here, and that basically you'll remove this covering and you'll cut it out here, and then you'll take, and you can see I've already removed this covering, and then this pre-made kit, this comes pre-made in the kit, you just have to cut the covering out. This will go here, and this one. Now what I want you not to do right away is go ahead and there's a hole back here, which if you're using cans, which the rear dump on your cans would come out back here. There's also one here. You need to make sure that before you just go and arbitrarily cut out this hole, that you have the correct size cans. The reason there's these different cutouts is for different size cans. If you have if you're using a DA120 and you have 17-inch cans, then you'll probably be using this back hole, this back cutout for the exhaust dump. If you have the 12-inch cans or the 12-inch or 14-inch cans, you're likely going to be using this one. Now, the difference is this hole does not have a pre-made plate, and it isn't smaller like the hole here. So you may have to fabricate a plate for this hole with a smaller exhaust dump. So just keep in mind before as you're preparing your fuselage and cutting out all the holes, you don't just go and arbitrarily cut out all these holes. Now some people opt not to even use these plates and just leave it solid and cut out the dump. That's up to you and what kind of cooling you want. But again, these pre-made plates are already in the kit as well. So just be careful before you cut out all these exhaust holes thinking that you have the right size can. You want to pre-fit everything and then go back and cut them out. So we'll come back to that later during the engine install, but again, make sure that we'll go over here shortly, tightening up all the covering and cutting out all the proper holes. So getting the fuselage prepared from a covering standpoint is super important. Now, the other thing that I recommend doing, and this is a painstaking process, get yourself a little dropper and some thin CA, or you can just use the bottle and just go over all the joints that you can go over. You're going to end up moving the fuselage around, so dripping thin CA on all your all the corners, everywhere you can get thin CA, everywhere. It's a very painstaking process. It takes 20, 30, 40 minutes depending on how in depth you get. But I really take the time to do every joint I can think of. I turn the plane sideways, I get this, I turn it the other way, I get back behind here, making sure that I get anywhere where I can make sure that I spend a little bit of time re-gluing any and all of the joints is vitally important to making your airframe strong and durable for any 3D type maneuvers you're going to do, or just making a nice strong airplane. Really helps the time you invest in that. So make sure you do that. A little bit of thin CA and a dropper, or you can use the attachment on your thin CA bottle. Either way that you like to do that, definitely make sure that you get all the joints clean. or glued, I'm sorry. The other thing that you're going to want to do also is make sure that on the motor box you take and tighten up all of these screws. Make sure you get a wrench on either side, make sure they're all really nice and tight. And most of all, some people, the motor box comes pre sort of fuel proofed. It's coated with a light thin layer of epoxy. You'll see a lot of different people do different things with the motor box as far as painting it. I suggest using, if you do want to paint it, using an enamel and possibly an enamel clear coat. You don't want to go crazy, you don't want to add all kinds of weight to the front of the plane painting it, but you can get a good paint job on the motor box. Make sure you tape off the covering, and if you want to get that done, it adds a little flair to the plane, makes it look, your build look a little bit nicer. So make sure you do that. Probably, you know, that's one of your pre-preparation things to do with the fuselage. You also have your cutouts up here. There's two cutouts and you can see them. You'll see you got some cutouts up here for the canopy pegs to secure there. Another place that you're going to have cutouts is, and you want to be careful that, I like to just, when I'm looking for holes, just sort of run your finger over them, and you can find them here is your holes for your canopy bolts. So you just want to make sure that you get all that stuff sort of pre-cut out. Again, some people like to use a soldering iron, and you know, I find that my sharp blade works the best, but you just want to make sure that once you cut that out, you make sure that that's ironed down good, and that you get all that covering nice and tight. So very important to make sure your covering's tight, and like we talked about that just a minute ago. So now this plane is covered in ultra coat. So I feel, just my own experience, I feel that ultra coat takes a little bit more heat to sort of pull the wrinkles out. The other thing you can use is a heat gun. I prefer to just use my iron, take my time, make sure. Sometimes a heat gun will take your seams here. If you're not really careful with them, it'll pull these seams away from the other color, or you could possibly expose wood if you get it too hot. So I like just using my iron. You can pull that away with an iron as well, but just make sure you're careful with that. So what we'll move on to next is the rudder pull system. So we're going to go over servo installation, radio setup, and cable installation. So we'll do that next.